Hey sellers, welcome back. Rob here. We're going to be doing another tutorial. This time we're going to jump into Chapter C and we're going to talk about OBA. Now this can be overly complex and it can be fairly simple depending on circumstances. So I'm going to have to break this video down into a couple. This is going to be the basics, so call it 101 if you will. And we're just going to cover the basics of what OBA consists of and how it's used. Um, the second video follow-on is going to get into more complex situations that you might encounter, different variations, and some applications on how you can use OBA in your games. So let's get to it. So basically, OBA is available to you when it's given on the scenario card as your order of battle. You may have a radio counter or a field phone counter, and you'll have an SSR denoting what that radio is going to get you. Or you're just going to have a notice like this one here with no radio symbol. You're going to have an SSR indicating that they have OBA capability of some kind. So you must read your SSRs as usual. Again, either on the order of battle, you'll have a radio, or in the SSR, you'll have information that designates whether or not you have a battery. You'll also get information such as caliber and ammunition types, possibly, as well as other information. Potentially, you might have pre-registered hexes, you might have scarce ammo, you might have plentiful ammo, and all that impacts various things in the OBA, which we're all going to get to. You're only allowed to have one radio or phone per battery, and you cannot use another radio to access another radio's battery. It's a one for one. Look at the counters themselves. So what we have here is a German radio, we have a French field phone, and we have a Russian radio. Now, if you look at the number at the bottom here, that's going to be your access number. The biggest difference is, we're going to get to that in a second here, but in order for you to call in artillery, you need to have a good order leader possessing a radio or a field phone. You'll also have an off-board observer, which is not represented by a counter. It's just noted on a side record and a hex on the board edge. In this case, we would have, for example, a off-board observer on level 3 at M1. So while the counter itself is physically off-board, all LOS measurements are done from hex M1. What I tend to do is I'll have a counter off the board here where I'll have my information like battery contact, for example, or my prep fires, my final fires, and just to remember for myself that I do have a unit up there. According to the advanced sequence of play, the first thing that happens in a fire phase is ordnance smoke. Once that is done, the next thing that must be done is any OBA. So again, we need a good order leader. After any ordnance smoke is fired, he must attempt radio contact if he wants to bring down a mission. And again, you look at the values. So for field phones, because they're landlines running back to the battery, they have a higher contact number. And the radio itself, being wireless, has a corresponding lower one. Sometimes, like the Russian one here, you have different values for radio contact. In this case, it's a 6, 7, and 8, and that is based on the year, which on the back of the Russian radio counter, you'll see that information. So basically up to 742, there'll be a 6. From July 42 to July 43 will be a 7, and anything past that will be an 8 for radio contact. But Russian radio tends to be the exception to the rule. Most nationalities will have an 8 for radio contact, and since the average for 2 dice is 7.5, on average, you should be getting radio contact every time. However, many scenarios nowadays have an SSR that indicates you have automatic contact and access for the first round, because artillery is so important to so many scenarios. And if you do not gain access, if you break your radio right on the first turn, and it's critical that you have OBA, you can see how that works in. And so they come up with an SSR to avoid that kind of problem. Should you fail to make radio contact, you obviously cannot access the battery. and you're still marked with a prep fire counter, indicating you can't do anything as you're trying to fix your radio or trying to get contact. When you do your radio contact attempt, remember, see the triangle indicates that no leadership modifier is available. So whether this is a 10-3 or a 6+1, it doesn't matter. Either way, you still need an 8 to gain contact. Using a radio to bring down OBA on your opponent is the only allowable action for that phase for the observer. Again, you're marked with a prep fire or a final fire once you're done your various action, indicating you cannot do anything else in that turn except for maybe the advanced phase you could move, or the route phase you could run away with your units that you're with. It should be noted that using a radio is not consume loss activity. You would not lose your consument if you were to conduct your fire mission. Even if you're marked with a prep fire counter to indicate your status, you still do not lose consument, and that means hip as well. If you are hip, you will not obviously put down a prep fire on your hex. That will give it away. You just make a side record that your observer has fired and he's not allowed to do anything. Again, looking at the OBA flowchart, this comes in the electronic book, and you can also get it in the pocket books if you order them, and you'll also get it in chapter dividers in the various modules that you'll get. Very handy aid, the off-board player aid, and it walks you through everything you need to know from contact and access through converting or correcting a spotting round to placing an FFE2, or correcting an FFE2, and finally what happens with an FFE continuation. So it's a nice 4-page pull-out, quite comprehensive explanation flowchart of what you need to do for an artillery mission. So while we're going through our various examples, I highly encourage you to have this out and walking through it as I do stuff. Also, if you play Vassal, they have an extension called OBA flowchart, which looks like this. And again, it just walks you through everything you need to know about fire missions. That information can be found at the vassal.info/extensions.htm. You can see the extension here along with some other handy ones. Download this, and if you want the flowchart to help with your Vassal games. Again, it's a nice handy tool. It lets you quickly go through the various options, and I use the flowchart as a base so that you can go through the procedures for OBA. So let's go back to the actual counters themselves. Again, OBA is represented by two things, radios and field phones. They work exactly the same except for a couple of differences. One is obviously the contact number, as I said, is different. Radios can be broken and repaired, whereas a field phone, if you roll a 12 and break it, then it is gone for good. Other limitations are with field phones. Field phones cannot be moved from scenario start, and they must have a security area drawn from that location to the nearest friendly board edge. So in this particular case, it'll be right down the M hex row to the board edge. That's its security area. Now, should any enemy unit come into this location and for whatever reason they roll a 2, original die roll of 2, they'll be able to cut your line, and or an FFE concentration, an HE concentration, or any HE shells that land along this line have a potential for breaking the line. If the line's ever broken or cut, you've lost access to your field phone and that battery. You cannot repatch it in the course of the scenario. The benefit to field phones is you can set up HIP. So even if it's not specified by SSR that you have HIP capability, if you have a field phone, you're always allowed to set up HIP. So as we saw in the example, you must maintain contact or the duration of a fire mission. So if we have access, if we have contact, and it is now, say, the next turn, and we're in the defensive fire phase, you must still make your radio contact attempt. And this is modified again by a -1 because you've already maintained contact. If you're using battalion assets like 70 or 80 millimeter mortars, those are typically assigned to the units. Anything larger is typically with those specialized artillery regiments and battalions. Anything smaller is part of the typically part of the battalion, which you'll have better chance of having access to, and so you'll have a -2 on your radio contact roll. You're only ever allowed to have one turn of lack of contact in the middle of a fire mission. Should you go a second turn and you're still unable to maintain contact, you'll lose your fire mission. So you're only allowed to have one turn of no contact before your fire mission is canceled. Once it's canceled, then you must do a second chit draw. Excuse me, you must do another procedure starting from AR, chit draw, and all the rest of it to initiate a second mission. Should you involuntarily lose contact, as I said, you roll a 9, 10, or an 11, maybe even break your radio. You do not lose contact. Again, you always have the one turn. However, if you voluntarily lose contact, you immediately cancel your access and your current fire mission, and then you must regain access as soon as possible. You must regain access whenever possible if you want to conduct another fire mission. All right, so there's different ways you can represent draw piles, and if you look at the National Capabilities divider in the rulebook, you'll see what the complement of chits are you need for OBA access. In this case, this example, you can see it's the German. They have 8 black and 3 red, and there's different ways you can do that. These are basically DM counters that come in the basic Beyond Valor, and you can punch them out and use them. Or you can use poker chips, or you can use different colored die. The point is you use something to randomize whether or not you have access. And you can use cards, another example. Typically, you're limited to whatever the battery access, OBA access indicates on the nationalities chart. However, you could modify that based on different things. If you have scarce ammo, then you add a red chit. If you have a pre-registered hex, 1 or more, you add a single black chit. And if you have plentiful ammunition, you would add a second black chit. Obviously, you cannot have plentiful and scarce in the same battery, so it would be one or the other. So you have a very good potential to have a complement like this, 9 and 4. Or you could have 10 and 3 if you have plentiful ammunition and a pre-registered hex for the Germans. Dave and I like to use the poker chips, and for that, we just take them, throw them in a bag, pick the bag up, reach in, and without being able to see what's there, you pull out a chit, and that's how we do it. So again, it's up to you how you want to do it. You can flip over their DM counters, you can use poker chips, or again, you can use playing cards to represent the access. Now, in order for you to get an FFE on the board, you must have access. You must draw a black chit. Should you draw a red chit instead, then you lose access for that turn. Your fire mission is not deemed important enough, and resources were spent elsewhere. If you draw a second red chit ever, it's going to be immediate loss of the battery for the rest of the game. Once you draw a chit, it's taken out of the pile. So, for example, in this case, the first chit was red. I'm now down to 8 black and 2 red. Chances are I'm probably going to get access. However, I could always draw a second red without getting a single fire mission. So, assuming you get access, you take one of the black chits out of the pot. You're now left with one less, so 7 and 3. If you do a second fire mission, say you're black, you're now down to 6 and 3, and you can see how it's going to get more difficult for you to bring down fire missions as you dwindle your availability. In some cases, you make your initial chit draw and it's black. However, given circumstances, for example, you do not see any known enemy units in or adjacent to the AR spotting on location, you must do a second chit draw to confirm. You can draw black or red. Whatever chit you draw goes back into the pile. It is not permanently lost. If you draw red, it means that you're not able to continue that mission. If you draw black, you confirm that you do have access to the battery. and you're able to continue that mission. But again, you do not take that second chit draw out. So let's look at observers. Now, it goes without saying that you must have LOS to where your artillery request is going to land in order to call an OBA. You cannot waste resources by just firing blindly. There are some observation post tanks, and this is information found in Chapter H rules. For example, the Panzerkampfwagen 3 allows you to be hatches down and observe rounds, but there are some tanks, typically the American and the British tanks, where you must be crew exposed in order to observe, otherwise a penalty may apply. Again, I refer you to the Chapter H 1.46 and following to see that information on what tanks you can use as OP tanks if it's not specified by SSR on the scenario card. So concealed units in non-concealment terrain and an LOS of a good order observer are always considered known. So while this unit is concealed, they are considered known because they are a non-concealment terrain. There's some exceptions to this. Nighttime, obviously, if they're wearing winter camouflage or if you're behind a bocage and you're claiming that terrain effect. Now, this only impacts OBA only, so the observer can see this. However, any other German unit would still treat this as a concealed unit and have to have your area fire. You can only operate one radio or phone per battery, so you cannot have multiple phones and radios with a single leader. It's one for one. And once your actions for that phase are done, you're marked with the applicable counter, either the prep fire or the final fire in the defensive fire phase. It should be remembered that using a radio to spot for OBA is not a concealment loss activity. You will not lose concealment, and that goes for HIP as well. So say you have a HIP leader here with a radio, you would not mark the blank hex for the prep fire because it would give it away. You just make a side record that the unit has fired and therefore their actions are limited in what they can do. Should your observer break for any reason or not be in good order, they immediately lose contact and access to the battery. Now, should that situation happen and you have another leader that's able to come in, he can pick up that radio from the broken leader because only leaders can take support items from a broken unit. And he can attempt radio contact himself and attempt access to continue a fire mission. So you can transfer radios between leaders. You just cannot transfer multiple radios onto a single leader. Any line of sight hindrances are always calculated cumulatively, and this affects your accuracy die roll. So for example, if I fire on this unit here, bring down a concentration, I would have to account for the 2 grain hexes. Because I'm a German, my accuracy is going to be a 1 or a 2. Again, if you look at the nationality capabilities chart, it tells you what your accuracy die roll is. And since this is a 2 or less and you have 2 grain hexes, there's no way that the round could be accurate, so therefore you just roll automatically for deviation. Again, the exception for hindrances are pre-registered hex. You do not factor that in because the battery has pre-sighted into that location. They've already fired rounds. They have all their coordinates and their elevation readings for their barrels, so they can fire into the location regardless of the hindrances. All right, let's talk fire missions. So a fire mission starts with a chit draw, getting battery access, and it ends when you have an FFE continuation on the board. You can only have one type of fire mission per mission, either smoke or HE, for example. You cannot switch back and forth in the middle of the same fire mission. So in FFE1, you want to drop HE, and then FFE2, you want to do smoke. You cannot do that. It's got to be one or the other for the duration of the fire mission. And there's 7 types. So we have HE, which concentration, which is the target and every adjacent hex. And it's the same template for smoke. Then we have harassing fire, which is represented by blue counters, and that is 2 hexes around the target hex at 1/3 of the FP. Then we have barrage. If you have a pre-registered hex, then you're entitled to fire a barrage, which is basically 1 center hex and 4 hex on either side. And you can do the same with smoke. Barrage, again, the same thing. 9 hexes worth of smoke. A barrage is fired with 1 column to the left of the caliber of the gun. So for example, the 120 millimeter would be on the 24 table. If you're fire barrage, you would be rolling on the 20 table. And then lastly, there's creeping barrage and illumination rounds. Illumination rounds I covered briefly in my night video, so I refer you to that. But basically, it is the only fire mission of the 7 that must be announced prior to the chit draw. All the other 6, you do not have to announce it until you actually do it. And it covers the target hex and basically 6 hexes all around illuminated. If you play Vassal and you turn on the night feature, you can clearly see the effects of having it. It might be hard to visualize when you're just playing with counters, but again, IR is target hex and 6 hexes around are all illuminated. A creeping barrage is basically a barrage that moves. So typically what happens is you'll have come down in the prep fire. You decide as a player, do you want it to lift every fire phase, so prep fire, defensive, or just every prep fire. So you could have either or, depending, you have to decide ahead of time. You also have to decide when it lifts. So if you want to advance every prep fire and it will lift after 5 turns, that's the case. And we'll get into the complexities of the barrage and the creeping barrage later on in the advanced video. I just want to show you the 7 basic types of fire that you can bring down. Again, as per the smoke rules, if you fire smoke in your defensive fire phase, you're always going to be dropping the white +2 dispersed. It's only OBA smoke dropped in a prep fire phase that is a +3. So typically what happens is most players don't fire that second shot because it's only going to be adding +2 to the smoke, and it's all going to be gone the turn following anyway, so it's a waste of counters. Most people just don't fire that second mission. It doesn't impact anything except to add more smoke on top of the existing smoke. A rocket uses the harassing fire template, but it fires at full firepower. So if you have a Nebelwerfer, say, or a 200 millimeter rocket launcher battery, they fire, you would target those hexes and at full firepower, not at 1/3. But that's the only exception to the harassing fire template. So let's talk about the FFV resolution, how to actually resolve it. So once you convert your spotting round, or if it's a pre-registered hex, you can fire an FFV immediately. It might deviate, but you can still fire it immediately. You start off with an FFV1. You then make a roll for each hex, including the target one. Each hex gets its own die roll. And there are some cases where some units will be immune to it. If you're in a tunnel, if you're an aerial unit, if you're a non-vulnerable PRC, say you're in an armored half-track and you're buttoned up, then you share the fate of your vehicle and certain climbing units. So each hex gets its own die roll, and even hex is devoid of units or should be rolled for because you might have HIP units. You might have, example, a field phone security area or hidden mines, fortifications. They can all be impacted with applicable rolls, so you should always roll for every hex, even if there's nothing there. Now, certain calibers are required for certain effects. You need to have 150 millimeter or bigger to make a shell hole. Any unit that enters into an FFE must be attacked, or if you change location, unless you're becoming less vulnerable. So, for example, let's say this row house here had a cellar, cellars were in play. If this unit's in the cellar, comes up to the ground level, and an FFE is in place, he would be attacked. However, if he's on the first level and he descends into the cellar, he's getting better terrain, he would not be attacked. The benefit of being in the lower level of a multi-story building is for every level above you, you get another +1 to your terrain effect versus OBA. So if this is a level 2 building, for example, and you're in the cellar, you would get a +4 for the cellar, +1 for ground, +2 for the second, +3 for the top. So you'd be a total of +7 results against you if you're in the cellar. So you see safety is obviously in the lower ground, but of course you have to pay the price of being less effective in the cellar. Generally speaking, terrain effect modifiers will always apply. However, there are some exceptions like height advantage, crest status, those kinds of things will not save you because the artillery is coming from above, not from a horizontal direction. Any roll of 2 is going to be considered a critical hit and therefore will be doubled with all applicable penalties. You know, you invert your terrain effect as a negative on the die, and you have a higher chance, obviously, of suffering greater casualties. If you're a friendly unit, you're non-heroic and you're non-berserk, and you're caught in an HE fired by your own side, your morale will be lowered by 1. So obviously they recognize the fact that it's friendly fire coming in, and it impacts their morale appropriately. FFE fire is never halved versus a concealed unit. And there's always a hindrance firing in it or through FFE template. If you were, for example, a unit in this woods, want to fire here, it would have to pay a +1 for the FFE effects, as well as the other hindrances that may be in the way. When it comes to a creeping barrage, that hindrance goes up to a +2. So all that being said, let's run through another example. This time we're going to use our handy dandy little OBA flowchart from Vassal to walk us through another example of what we want to do. So we're going to have the same setup. Again, we're going to have French units and buildings. We're going to have a concealed unit in the open behind a wall. And we have an 8-0 with a radio. So it's a German turn, and the first thing he's going to do after any ordnance smoke has been fired is attempt radio contact. So we rolled an 8, which means we have contact. This would normally go on the scenario card, 8 card that comes with one of the chapter dividers, where it gives you a box for radio contact and access. We tend not to use that, Dave and I, so we just use the counter itself. That's good enough for us. Next thing that we want to do is we must gain battery access. So here we draw our chits. And again, because we're German, we get 8 black and we get 3 red. So we have no modifiers for pre-registered or scarce or plentiful ammunition, just a straight up 8 black and 3 red. Put them inside the bag, give it a shake. And we draw a black chit. So we have battery access. Now we place our AR down where we want to bring it around down. So again, because this unit is concealed, it is considered known to an observer. No other German unit will be able to fire on that as a known target. It would have to be halved area fire. But it doesn't apply to an observer. So I can see this unit here. In this particular case, it doesn't matter because I can actually see the unit in the back. But if this was the case and they're obscured, I would still be able to bring it down because that would constitute a known unit. So we can clearly see this unit falling along the hex grain. We bring our AR down, and now we have to roll our accuracy. Now, because the Germans have it 1 or 2, and we have 2 grain hexes in between, it cannot be accurate. So we're just going to roll a straight random direction for a spotting round. So we look at our flow chart. We want to go normal. We have radio contact. We do not have a spotting round or FFE on board. So we do a chit draw. We get black. NOBA stands for Naval Offboard Artillery. Again, I'm going to cover that later on in the more complex session. So here we place the AR. And do we have a location? Yes. If there are enemy units in or adjacent, and all of them unknown to the observer. In this case, no, because again, we can see them. If for some reason this was bocage, these guys are claiming wall advantage, so they're hidden. These guys were back here. I would not be able to see it. I know that they're there, but I can't see them. I would be forced to do a second chit draw. But again, in this case, we're just going to keep them where they were. So we can say no to this. Do we want to place an FFE right away if it's pre-registered? Again, we do not have pre-registered, so we have to say no. So we place a spotting round to make an accuracy die roll. Now, again, we cannot be accurate because we have the grain in between, which is going to eliminate the 2 or less that we need. So we cannot be accurate, so we do a direction extent of error. Again, black will be direction. And we go 5 for 2. 1, 2. AR comes off. We are marked with a prep fire. And end of action. Now it is the French turn. Nothing has changed in the French orientation. They're still going to stay where they are. Now we have to do the German defensive fire phase. And again, the first thing we must do is radio contact to see if we can still maintain it. We must roll a 9 or less because we get a -1 because we're continuing artillery action. So I rolled a 7, -1's a 6, so I do have radio contact, and I can continue my mission. Now I want to adjust my spotting round, and I want to convert it to an FFE. So again, bring on our flowchart. We want to go in normal action. Is radio contact established? Yes. We have a spotting round on board. Do you wish to cancel? No. Do you have LOS to the blast site, which means we can see it? Yes. Do you want to correct it? Yes. Do you want to convert it after moving it or just correct it? There are different penalties. Again, I'm going to get into that in the more advanced tutorial. For our purposes right now, we just want to convert it in place. So we want to convert to FFE1. You have to tell your opponent that that's the case. And you place your AR where you want to put it, again within 18 hexes. Bear in mind that you're going to have serious penalties when it comes to landing on the target hex if it deviates too much. So you want to pick a nice close range, like within 3 hexes ideally. So in this case, I'm only 2 hexes away. I want to bring my FFE back to where it is. I have LOS to location, yes. No. You place your spotting round in the hex and make accuracy. Die roll. So again, it cannot be accurate because of the grain. So it is not accurate in this case. So the maximum extent of error equals distance of correction divided by 3 rounded up. Because we only move 2 hexes, it's only ever going to be 1 hex deviation. So we just have to roll direction. So in this case, I rolled a 1. So we take our spotting round, we flip it over to the FFE1 side, and we put it down. AR comes off. We can mark with a prep fire, and now we resolve our FFE against all the units and all the blank hexes as well. And there we have OBA 101, just the basics to get you guys used to some of the counters and how a good fire mission will go. Again, it can get very complex when you start talking creeping barrage, different hindrances and such, and unknown enemy units in the vicinity of your OBA. All that we're going to cover in OBA 201, which will be coming up shortly. So hopefully this is some use to you. Let me know if there's anything else you want to see about artillery that I may have missed. And of course, if I've made any mistakes, please point them out in the comments down below so that we can correct them for future videos. And with that, we'll see you guys next video.